first thing I teach them about is the concept of intimacy. Most guys use the word intimacy thinking they're being clever, that they can use that and sound smart without using the word sex, because they equate the word intimacy with,
That's
penis
interesting.
and vagina sex. Like that's what intimacy is.
Okay.
And I said, "Do you know about the other types?" And they go, "What do you mean?" The other types. And there's articles and books written about intimacy. There's four types or five or eight types. And the four that I usually use are the emotional intimacy that you and I are sharing right now. We're being so open with each other. This is very emotional conversation. There's intellectual intimacy, which is trusting each other not to think we're, the other person's stupid. And we're sharing intimacy here right now. You and I are also talking about some fairly philosophical and spiritual notions.
Mm.
So you and I right now have emotional, intellectual, and spiritual intimacy, and it's very connecting. It just feels really good to me. I don't know about you. I can't control you, so I don't care. Right? It's outcome independence. I don't care what your experience is. I'm loving this conversation, and if we could fist bump through the screen, then we would have physical intimacy, right? And you don't have to have sex to create this incredible feeling of high regard and appreciation and adoration for who the person is. And guess what leads to actual sex? It's those feelings of connectedness in the emotional and spiritual, intellectual realm. Um, and that's what I tell guys. That's my answer to your question. Now, let's get real. Some guys who are 35 and they still have 35-year-old level testosterone and libido, there is a total pornified performance level anxiety they have about sexuality and people liking them and getting abs and all the stuff that you need to do. And there is a very strong physical component to being sexually confident. But as you age, as you get 40, 50, 60 years old, you realize the physical component is still important, but it has to be preceded by something deeper, something more meaningful. And so what I do is teach guys to get back to the basics. One thing we use a staircase of intimacy to talk about all the small tries, all the small things you can do to connect before you even think about initiating something like intercourse. And so that's the first thing. It's an intellectual dive into what intimacy really is, that your dad never told you. And like most guys, I learned everything I knew from Playboy and Penthouse. So that was my education.
Yeah.
Turns out that it's not all true.
It's not telling the whole story.
I am afraid to announce to the world that it's not the whole story.
Mm.
Yeah.
Steve, uh, there's so many places we could go with this conversation of sex, but something that really just struck me is when you were talking about intimacy and all the ways that you and I are having an intimate conversation and connection right now. And you said,
Mhm.
I'm loving it. I'm feeling it. I don't know if you are, but honestly, I don't really care because I can't control you. And I'm having this experience right now. That just struck me because that's that freedom that you get when you let go of needing to control the outcome, right? Because you get to be having, and I am loving it and I am feeling that too, but I don't actually know if I'm feeling what you're feeling because I can't feel what you're feeling, right? I can only feel what I'm feeling, and it feels really good to me, right? So we both get to have this amazing experience in connection, but ultimately it doesn't really matter what the other person's internal experience is. Um, that piece, I mean, maybe that's like too much of a deep dive off into that philosophical cliff, but I find that piece is so fascinating just when it comes to the whole concept of love in the first place, because we think of love as something like I give you love, so you feel loved, and then you give me love back, and I feel loved, and we have this reciprocal transactional love.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
really, if I love you, I feel that love, right? I get to feel it. I can't make you feel it. So then that unconditional love really becomes it's there if you want to receive it in
The
whatever way you
gift. Yeah.
choose to receive it, but I get to experience it. And it sounds like when you talk about intimacy that way, that's true kind of all the way across the board from love through that intimacy and even into sex.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
You're making me think about guys who are worried about dating. Um,
Yeah.
And I say, imagine you're on a sidewalk. You're one of these pedestrian areas in an old part of town, umbrellas, and there's just food and beer, and it's just people walking. It's a great summer day. And most guys, a lot of women don't know this about men, that we are saps. We're absolute suckers for the romance story. As I tell, I could paint picture about the color of the umbrellas, and he's on a second date with a woman who's wearing a dress that just is, she's a knockout. In every respect, he just likes her mind, her body. And she sits down and asks for a glass of red wine, and they start talking. And she says, last time we talked, I had a really good time, but there's something personal I wanted to ask you. And he goes, what? I'm an open book. You can ask me anything. She goes, I'm just curious why you got divorced. I mean, what actually happened? Why did you get divorced? And what do you think now? What did you learn? And I help guys, we spend an hour and a half on this topic, not to come up with the perfect line, but to come up with the truth. The truth. So he could take a sip of beer, look up at the sun, and say, okay, I'm going to answer you. And I'm going to tell you exactly how I feel about this. And he's going to tell her what he learned. That intimacy that's built right there on that date is a lot like this conversation you and I are having. I mean, for the viewers, they could pretend you and I are on a date having an amazing conversation.
Yeah.
The only thing I regret is that you're interviewing me, so you're the one asking me all the questions. And so I don't get to ask you, and it feels one-sided here. I'll just tell you that. If it was a real date, I say, can I ask you a question? Like, can you be quiet for a minute? I want to ask you about your husband and all that stuff. That would be weird if you're married on a date. Anyway, for the viewers, it is the quality of the conversation. It's the openness, it's the vulnerability. And so you stop worrying about sex. You realize that the best sex you've ever had was never planned. It was never strategized. You didn't have a board out with a bunch of chess pieces. I mean, the best sex you've ever had was never actually expected. It just happened. And that's a faithfulness there that if you pay attention to intimacy and connection and authenticity, let it happen. Just stop worrying about it.
There's there's something so freeing right there, Steve, right? Because when it comes to dating, and I think especially if you've been married for a long time and now you're coming out into this world where there's all this online dating and we've been through all of the COVID, and it's daunting and it's
Mm.
overwhelming. And what are the rules and how do you play the game and what do people expect and what are you, and I've had guys be like, well, what do I do? We go on the date. Am I supposed to, do I pay for an Uber for her? Like, what's the right, like there's all the little details of who does what. And do you pay for dinner or is that chauvinistic now? And like, and what you're saying is just let it all go and tell the truth, right? Just be authentic and real, and that allow that to create the connection and the intimacy, which will
Mm.
naturally lead to great sex, to great relationships, to good connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That whole who pays and all that stuff. Guys get caught up on convention and things that they think they're supposed to do. They wonder a lot. Guys can wonder. We talk about leadership in dating and not being dominant, but leading the discomfort. Right, first date, you just bring it up. If you're a leader and you're not outcome dependent, and you want to buy dinner, you say, "Hey, before we get started, I want to ask you if it would be okay with you if we just agreed that I get to pay for dinner tonight. If we're lucky enough to have a second date, you can pay if you feel like it. But just to avoid awkwardness, do you mind if I pay for stuff tonight?" And she would go, well, probably, but at least bring it out. Stop pretending. Stop waiting for the moment when the check comes and you don't know what's going to happen. A good friend of mine, a lady named Grace, said she had two dates in a row. And I just have to tell you the story for the guys to demonstrate the masculine energy and the leadership that she said was so pronounced on two different dates. Like on Thursday, she had a date with a guy she really connected with online, and she's sitting in the restaurant, and she's sitting there 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Finally, around 25, she's getting ready to pack up and go. And thinks she's been stood up. And here he comes busting through the door with the front tire of his bicycle on. He's sweaty and he had his bike helmet on. And he said, oh my God, I had a flat tire and I lost my phone or my phone wasn't charging. I got to pee really bad. Oh, where's the bathroom? Oh, can you order me a beer? Right. And I don't know how you're feeling. Right? She said, I was flabbergasted with what a little boy had just shown up in his bicycle suit and his panic and all his anxiety and his nervousness and it was just ridiculous. And that turns out to be his main personality. So when he finally did sit down for dinner, the whole thing was like that. Everything was about him. Friday, she has a date. and she shows up to a different restaurant, and he's early. And he remembered she mentioned something about Pinot Noir, and he had ordered a glass and already had it. He already decided where he'd like her to sit so he could see the rest of the restaurant. And he asked her to sit down. He mentioned where the restrooms were because he knew she had like a 45-minute drive to get there. And they had she said the energy between guy number one and guy number two was so clear that the second guy knew who he was, what he believed in, what he wanted. He didn't pressure anything. He was prepared, and he just made me feel safe. He even picked the chair so I would have a better view, and also so he could see her too. He actually knew where the bathrooms were, and he remembered the wine. It didn't take much effort. So the lesson for guys listening is that leadership doesn't require dominance or coercion. Leadership means just having an idea, having a plan, taking care of business, stating the obvious, and not getting caught up in questions.
Yeah. It's such a good story, Steve. There's also such a clear difference there, right? In just where the focus is. The first guy, the focus is all on me and everything that's happening and going wrong and out of my control and stressed out. And the other guy is just focused on what does she need? What would make her more comfortable? And
Yeah,
that's almost the leadership right there, right? Is I'm thinking about
that's it.
what other people need because I have to as the leader. I can't be caught up in my own bullshit, my own worries, my own stress, because then I'm not taking care of anyone else. Wow,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot in that story. That's a powerful one.
I
Thank
tell
you.
that a lot to demonstrate the two energies.
Yeah.
One is a 13-year-old, and the other one is a grown ass
Yeah. Very simple.
man.
Well, Steve, we have just a few minutes left here. And I know this has felt kind of one-sided. And you said you want to ask me something. Would you like to, in this last few minutes, is there something you'd like to ask me?
There was one question I had when I was telling you the story about the ladies at happy hour and all of them complaining about their husbands, except the one who said, well, I actually really love my husband. How would it make you feel if you were a fly on a wall and your husband, I know he was a professional chef, and he was after work and people were sitting around kind of bitching about relationships and marriage, and he said exactly what I said she said about you. Now you don't know this, you're just a fly on the wall and you got to watch it. How would that feel to you?
And just so I'm clear that what the second woman said, but like I really love my
Yeah.
husband and yeah.
Yeah, and he says that about you. And what he says is like it just blows your mind that you almost didn't know that he thought about you that way.
So
What would it feel like?
I am really lucky, Steve, because I actually know exactly what it feels like because I've gotten to have that experience. Um,
Mm,
I've been with my husband for 11 years and we've been married, he would know, 6 or 7. Um,
mhm,
and he does speak about me in that way and he always has. And I know that mostly from what other people tell me. I often have people say, wow, you should hear the way he talks about you. And it's crazy. You asked how would I feel? And I can, when I'm just saying that, I can feel myself choking up a little and getting emotional, almost
mhm,
brings tears to my eyes. Because I think that word that you used earlier, feeling safe.
mhm,
Um, and I feel very loved and very safe and very cherished by him. And just
mhm,
knowing that that is what he shares about me. And honestly, I also feel, and this has been true, I think, through my whole relationship with him, is that it's also inspiring to me. It's something for me to aspire to set aside my own 13-year-old girl and her judgments and fears and complaints and criticisms. If I notice them creeping into, how am I thinking about him? What story am I telling about him? Am I being as generous and cherishing him as much as I know he does me when he talks about me.
yeah.
So yeah,
And that's what every guy was wondering when you were talking, and I'll speak for them.
yeah.
Oh, great. Well, that's great. He does that for you. Do you do that for him? And don't bother answering. They already know the answer. um, But sometimes it's a struggle on the bad days. Like he's worked a 15-hour day and now he comes home grumpy and he doesn't pay attention or whatever. And then there's this regard we have for each other that we're all doing the best we can. Even with 15-hour days and having an upset stomach and then getting cut off in traffic. And um, love is not supposed to be easy. In fact, one of the best quotes I ever heard is that marriage is not a place where you're supposed to go to be happy. It's a place where we learn how to love. And if you can't figure it out there, you won't find it anywhere. Um,
That that's such a good way to simplify it. It's a place you go to learn how to love because then it becomes about the process too. Right? Because it's not perfect and I'm not perfect at it. And yes, he speaks very well about me. And that's so touching, but he's not perfect at it either. But I do feel very blessed in my partnership that I do feel like we're constantly both trying to figure out how to love better and how to move
mm,
through those blocks and those stuck places. And something that I find has been a struggle for me, I think, my whole life in my relationships, and that I'm still working my way through is how I respond to anger. And I don't know if this is,
mm.
I haven't worked with
Your own
someone,
or his?
his, um, and
Okay.
honestly, anyone's. It's been really valuable for me to have the experience of working with my clients' anger. And I haven't talked to enough women about this to really say if this is kind of women in general, or if this is my personal journey and story. But what I see both in my own relationship and with a lot of my clients is that for a lot of men, and I think women too, when there's pain or fear, we often respond with anger. But that anger can look so strong, right? Because that's kind of what it is. It's the like, I'm strong enough, I can't be hurt, that it can be hard to see past and behind it to the fear. And so that's really where,
Yeah.
I'm finding I'm very good at that with my clients, holding space for their anger and seeing them through their anger. I'm not as good at it with my husband. Um, and so that's my journey is can I see the injured part or the wounded part when he's, and I say anger, I mean he's never angry at me. He's a very but he gets frustrated at the world. And I think that for so many men, I hear that across so many of my clients, is that the world right now and so many things that are happening in it isn't a world that's really for men in so many ways. And I think a lot of men feel very out of place in the world. And that is a source of frustration and anger. And, then all the little daily things from the drive to what happens in the grocery store to what you see on the news can be so frustrating. And I notice my response to frustration is to pull away from it or to judge it or to
Yeah.
criticize it or say you shouldn't be, instead of seeing past it and trying to understand, well, what is the pain? Like, why are you feeling that? So that's where I'm at in my personal
Mm.
journey, is I can hold that space
Thanks for
well for my
sharing that.
clients,
It's
but
good.
it is, I think that's what marriage and even not marriage, just romantic relationships are for, is they're so good at triggering those little places in us and teaching us where the next thing that we need to learn lives.
If you can find a place of grace and maturity and inner peace, security in a marriage, in a relationship, a monogamous romantic relationship, you've got the world by the balls. That's the most challenging place to learn how to love. Talking to clients who have businesses of their own, they are so patient and so kind and so understanding and so workable and so flexible and so easy to kill with their clients. And I always ask, what's the one power nobody, not even your kids, no client, not your coach, what's the one power she has that nobody else has? They go, what do you mean? What do you mean? I don't know. I say, yes, you do. There's one thing she can do. It's like on the tip of her pinky. And if she pulls it out, you're devastated. And they almost always say, she can gut me. She has a power to hurt me in a way nobody else can hurt me. She has a way of saying things in her anger or her criticism. It can go into cracks that nobody else sees in me. And when that happens, I lose it. I either lose it and disappear in avoidance, or I lose it in my anger, in my retaliation. And so then we go, okay, good. We know you're a rock star everywhere else. Let's talk about all the cracks that she can fill that just make you feel like that. Why does she have the power to hurt you? And it's not because she's good at hurting, although many people are ninjas when it comes to hurting other people, gaslighting them and everything else. They're ninjas. And so we talk about what's in that crack, and it is the unworthiness, it's the self-doubt, it's the self-criticism. And then sometimes when we hear a criticism, it just fans the flame of shame that we think we already have. And we fight against it. And so I call that the lipstick tube of whoop ass. It's like a James Bond tube. I said, go into her lipstick. Every woman has a drawer with lipstick tubes she doesn't use anymore, and grab the one you think is the one and put it in your pocket and take the power back and say, now she can't hurt me anymore. I'm free to love her because now when she's doing that stuff, it's gonna be like Teflon. I know she doesn't mean it. It'll be like my kid said, Daddy, you're a stupid poopy head. You're the worst daddy ever. I hope you die. And sometimes kids get horrible like that. But
But
even
you don't
then he
take it
goes,
on.
no, but he goes, don't be late for dinner. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And but if your partner says that, put a knife in me, I'm done.
Yeah.
Or fork or whatever the metaphor is.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have to work on that, on the shame that when people criticize you, it amplifies your own feeling of that.
Yeah. But that's, you talked about looking at the divorce, your divorce, as this was supposed to happen. And I know it was because it
Yeah.
did. And now what do I learn? How do I grow? What do I take away? And I think that's what all of that hurt, that reactivity in marriage is for, right? Because every time I
Yeah.
feel triggered or reactive because of something he did or said or the tone of his voice when he got home, that's showing me exactly where that crack is in my own self-worth, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, I thought I had worked. Oh nope, there's still something there that needs my attention, that needs my awareness, that needs to be healed or grown. Or so it really, that's how I that's my approach to um, success in a marriage, is
Yeah.
not to, because I don't think it's really possible, maybe for some people eventually, to always stay in that place of real like peace, compassion, empathy, calm. Instead, I really try to look at it as what is the opportunity? What is it that I get to learn today? What is this
Yeah.
showing me where I can grow and heal and become more of who I really am? So.
And I'm recognizing there's another hour conversation that
Yeah.
guys' heads are thinking as they're watching. They're going, yeah, 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 but. And the sentence starts with, at what point do you need to set a boundary for behavior that's so inexplicably toxic and unacceptable? You
Yeah.
know where this is going. This is a whole
Yep.
nother hour conversation of what are the tools you use when things are actually horrible. I mean, really bad. And
That's maybe
so,
the next conversation we should have,
yeah,
Steve, because I mean, the short answer that I give people is that you always get to choose, right? And loving someone doesn't mean you have to tolerate certain actions, words, behaviors. You get to
yeah,
choose what experience to have. And then you can love someone and never see them again. And that's okay too. Um, but
that'll be a fascinating
that's a
conversation.
whole talk. Steve, I can't thank you enough. It's such a pleasure to talk
I
with you.
agree.
Thank you
It
for
is a pleasure.
sharing.
Thank you, Rachel.